is Manette Bradford, and I'm a visual artist. Thank you for sticking around to the end. I really appreciate it. I'm currently an artist in residence with Open Air here in Butte. Though I work in many different mediums, I have a BFA in sculpture from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. I lived and worked in Chicago, the Bay Area, and now Montana. In this work I use as I work two-dimensionally. This approach is the act of physically cutting up and recomposing an artwork in order to make the composition more interesting and dynamic, and to potentially open the work up to new meaning. As an artist with a sculptural background, I found that I would often be unsatisfied with a fixed composition when I worked on drawings and paintings. It seemed to me that the way each element in the image related to the other elements was predetermined. Everything in the work was already known, and I would become bored. So I began cutting all of the different elements out and playing with them. I wanted to physically move them around in order to understand them and the space that they inhabit. This is similar to the way someone might work on a sculpture, rotating it and viewing it at different angles, observing and experimenting with the way it interacts with the space around it. Visual people sometimes think with their hands, and the act of moving your images around can help your mind make connections it might not otherwise make. So here's an example. As an example, I'm going to use this piece. It's called Clark's Fork. It was the first in the series. This is watercolor paper collage on canvas, and it's 6.5 feet high by 10 feet wide. I have 3 pieces at that scale. And to give you an example of the watercolor paper pieces I would use, this is something I did while I was here. It's watercolor on a large roll of watercolor paper. It's an aerial view of the Berkeley Pit, a photograph of the Berkeley Pit. Just to give you an idea of the scale, this was sort of the scale that I was working in when I made these pieces. So this is the final work. These are some of the images that I started with in my studio in Red Lodge when I started this piece. Just to give you an idea of kind of what I had. I only used about 1/3 of what I painted for this piece in my final piece. And there's me, technically this is me adhering everything to the canvas, but this is also what I looked like when I was standing over my canvas, moving my images around on the canvas. Though the examples I am giving are of my two-dimensional work, this is an exercise that you can build into your own visual art process, or that you can apply to other creative processes like writing, creating music, video editing, cooking, etc. Why would you want to cut something up that you put so much work into? To make it better, to push yourself, to expand the potential of the work, and to invite in an element of the unknown. To get out of your own way and help your mind relinquish control. You can use this method when you're unsatisfied with a piece, or when you think that the composition isn't dynamic enough, or when you only like certain parts of it. It allows you to develop your work while keeping it unresolved and open. It can keep the work fresh and alive and can lead to a final outcome that might surprise you. It is a way of severing your attachment to a specific outcome when disrupting your unconscious tendencies, allowing you to view your work critically and enabling you to see its weaknesses and strengths. You can create the detachment you need to cut up your own work through 2 ways, either by giving yourself time away from your work to be able to see it objectively, or by building the detachment and dismembering of your work into your process. The first approach is pretty straightforward. You know intuitively when something isn't working. But initially when you look at it, you might see how much time you spent on it or a specific part of it that is working. So take time away from it, and when you come back to it eventually, you will have a clear understanding of how and why it isn't working. You still might feel some resistance to cutting it up. But in that moment, be honest with yourself. Do you really like it that much? What do you have to lose? Worst case scenario, you end up destroying something mediocre. Best case scenario, you transform something mediocre into something incredible. But it doesn't also have to be used as a last resort. The second approach I mentioned, building detachment into your process, will vary depending on who you are and how you work. I accomplished this for myself by producing my images and photographs of my subjects, which I would project onto large rolls of watercolor paper, trace with pencil, and paint in with watercolor. Because I traced my images directly from photographs, I felt less of an emotional attachment to my images than I would if I had painted them directly from life or from my mind, allowing me to cut them up and edit them down to what was essential for the image. So this is a photo that I used as a reference for my landscape in Clark's Fork, and I just focused on a section of it and painted that in with watercolor. These are some images of the stretcher before I stretched them, and images of landscapes and, you know, a huge foot before I cut it out. And I ended up with these images of landscapes. I ended up really editing them down to what was essential. This is an aerial view that I took. I would get up on a ladder over my canvas, and then I would play with composition. And so I did this for about 3 weeks, and I experimented with the figures and with the landscape, and really worked on it for a while, and would take these photos home and look at my phone at night and think about what I wanted to do. And then this was the final composition that I ended up with. There are parallels between this method of cutting up and reorganizing elements of your work and what your mind does when it dreams. Throughout each day, your mind accumulates and stores information, images, events, interactions, intuitions, and then reshuffles it and plays it back to you when you sleep. Through these remixes of your experiences, you may solve problems or develop an understanding of a situation that you may not be able to do in your waking life, revealing information that you may not discover through conscious intention alone. So I was hoping for this workshop that we would all make imagery intentionally, just to cut up and collage and move around. So you know, it helps to be detached from what you're working with in the beginning. As a prompt, you can look at maybe the first 5 images in your photo library, the last 5 images you took, or just draw from your mind. But I would encourage you to do something just like fun and loose. You could do repeating patterns and cut them up. You could draw a drawing that you don't really like, that you don't think is that great, and then cut it up and play with it. But the objective is to cut things up and to move them around. And we have adhesive, we have, there's tubes of watercolor paint over there, and palettes, there's water on your table, watercolor pencils and colored pencils, and this is just a sample. This is an example of what I'm talking about. This is what the watercolor paper looks like up close, and the work looks like up close. That's it.